We're in this really interesting moment, right? Caroline said it at the top, 6 straight weeks of gains on the NASDAQ 100. I feel like the next phase is like this pre-IPO anticipation. You know, Cerebras, yes, SpaceX, June. How does that impact a market at the index level, that anticipation?
Well, I think the anticipation does keep a lot of eyes obviously focused not just on AI, but on the broader index. And it's interesting because on the one hand, yes, markets have gone up, but so too have earnings. We've just come through an earnings season. We're almost towards the end of it. When you've got top and bottom line growing double digits, not just among tech, but that anticipation is there. We'll see if we get several $1 trillion sized deals later this year, what the investment appetite is and how much can be absorbed. Because unlike your former commentator, we do have some nervous clients because on the one hand, they don't want to get off the bus. On the other hand, they're scratching their heads about how can markets be at all-time highs when you've got all these concerning short-term headlines, which you just mentioned.
Carol, can we not have two things being correct at the same time? Yes, there are short-term issues. Yes, oil is an issue, and in some ways for chips, helium and other things that pass through the Strait of Hormuz are an issue. But longer term, the drive towards AI infrastructure is only a supply-side issue rather than demand.
Yep, exactly. And that's exactly what we've been writing to our clients. I wrote a piece last Friday talking about a brave new world and just laying out the case for this next phase that we're in, because the orders of magnitude that we're talking about investing in capital infrastructure, that tends to tee you up for very good performance from a productivity standpoint, from GDP. And we're seeing it start to creep in the numbers because it's not like the markets are just floating up without earnings and revenue and margin support, and you're seeing very well managed tech companies that are paying a lot of attention to their margin management and the way they're managing their people and their costs and their inputs. And you're exactly right that it's capacity constraint. It's not like we're going to have dark data centers. Other than the fact that if you can't get energy to turn them on.
Well said. That is the bottleneck that many are focusing in on. It's why everyone's turning towards nuclear. It's why we look at Constellation Energy's earnings, and we'll be diving into them in but a moment. But there's this great report out of Bloomberg Intelligence at the moment. AI is swallowing the world. Everything else is just holding on. Is that the sense you get from clients at the moment, Carol? Because this isn't just a US trade, and boy, have we seen Qualcomm, Micron, other of the chip sectors up today, and the stocks has been extraordinary. But think of the moves of SK Hynix, of Samsung. There's still earnings potential for those companies, means that even though we've seen hundreds of percentage points added in terms of their share price, the PE ratios are actually coming down because people think earnings are going to rise even faster.
That's exactly it. And the markets are telling you underneath the surface, too, that even with all of the issues going on in the Strait of Hormuz and the fact that the bulk of that oil goes to Southeast Asia, those stocks are rallying anyway because they're telling you this is a lot bigger. And one of the phrases we had used in last week's piece was, how about, yeah, I mean, it's like we're all grabbing the tiger by the tail and just hanging on for the ride. But it's got fundamental underpinnings to it, and it touches so many other places. And you take, I spent the weekend talking to grandkids about how exciting space is and right. Lots of things going there. There's so many things we haven't even started to explore.
I'm changing my mind. I just asked Marguerite in the control room to bring back that research, but you brought up space, so I'm going to pivot. Right. The point of that research is that the entire market, in terms of profit growth, is held up by a very small number of companies. Yes, they're around the world, AI infrastructure related. SpaceX is trying to sell that story as well, right, with its IPO. The vision the bankers are putting out on the roadshow is orbital data center. How easy is that for you to translate to clients, Carol? Like, is that believable for the biggest IPO of all time?
Well, the IPO aside, when you take the Artemis mission and what was going on there, and the fact that actually when you look at earnings, it's not just a handful of companies, because we had double-digit revenue growth. I pulled the numbers from Bloomberg this morning, and you had double-digit revenue and bottom and earnings growth in 8 out of 11 sectors. So this is pretty broad spread, right. And there's a lot of companies playing into it. But space, I mean, clients love to talk about space. The Artemis mission got kind of shoved aside because it coincided with increased hostility in the Middle East, so it got pulled short term. But this is definitely a market that wants to lean into that long-term story, and investors are all about it.
Carol, earlier you talked about riding the bus. And if we stick with that analogy, if you are an investor and you know that the biggest IPO of all time is happening in a month's time, do you put yourself into cash or do some kind of rejiggering in order to be able to participate in that IPO?
Well, we don't necessarily go chasing down IPOs any more than I did managing money for clients in the 90s IPOs per se. But strategic rebalancing is something we do all along, and trimming some of your losers or some of the winners, if you will, trimming some of the gains that you've made there to make sure that the portfolio stays balanced. Intermediate and longer term is where you want to be. We've been growth biased all along. Starting before last year, we never bought into the recession fears in 22. We didn't think that tariffs were going to throw things substantially off last year, although our companies are learning to adapt. And this year, too, we think it makes sense to trim some of the winners, look at other industries, look at those second and third tier knock-on industries. We touched on energy, we touched on space. There'll be substantial rebuilding or reconstruction, if you think. Once we settle some of these, the conflicts, Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, you're talking about substantial rebuilding. You're also talking about companies rethinking supply chains and where they get done and solidifying. So you're talking about a massive infrastructure build or teeing up for that has many years to run.
Carol, I want to go to the rethinking of supply chains because for many years people have been rethinking their dependence on China. Maybe that starts to get more clarity this week. We understand that President Trump, of course, is going for that meeting with President Xi over in China, and he's taking a whole host of CEOs with him. Tim Cook of Apple, Elon Musk, of course, talking of SpaceX, but a moment ago, Micron, the chip sector, Qualcomm, but also there are some sprinkling of banks and other areas. Carol, does this meeting mean something to your clients, briefly?
Yeah. We definitely think we've been watching this geopolitical pivot and the geoeconomic pivot for the last year and a half or so, and it's been clear from the beginning that you've got two major players in terms of the U.S. and China. China was the only primary country able to push back on the U.S. against the tariffs and engage in, even if briefly, in the trade war, but they've got critical supply chain issues with rare earths. The U.S. has critical supply chain issues with energy and materials, and clearly they want to have a collaborative relationship where there's certain things that we want to manufacture here, certain things China wants control over, but business deals are what the administration is all about, and hence bringing a lot of those companies with. But you've got a lot of interesting interplay to watch here and how this thing plays out.